All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next episode of the DSEF video podcast. Now, before I introduce our moderators today and Gail walks us through the topics, I want to go ahead and just give us a bit of a background on Clint McKinlay. Clint, we're so excited to have you here today. For those of you who haven't met Clint before, Clint's a seasoned and bilingual retired CEO and global business executive. His experience includes several leadership roles from leading wellness, beauty, and fashion brands with annual revenues ranging from startup to several hundred million to even $1 billion USD. Responsibilities have included profit and loss ownership for businesses in South America, Asia, Europe, and North America. And at heart, Clint is a galvanizer and communicator, an ally to women in business. Clint is based in beautiful Los Angeles, California. For those of you who haven't yet heard of Clint's work, he's served in roles at Ruby Ribbon most recently, then Jafra Cosmetics, and Shaklee and Rodan Fields. Clint believes that the curiosity and openness to real learning are catalysts to growth and meaning in business and in the rest of life. Clint, thank you so much for joining us here today on the panel.
Thank you, Ben. Pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
So this is too much fun. Gail had put together our season of topics, and when she picked this topic, I said, "Oh my gosh, we have to invite Clint to come out and talk." And so Gail, walk us through what are we talking about today on the DSEF video podcast.
First off, I'd like to welcome everyone listening and welcome Clint to the DSEF today. And our topic is about how can I set my company apart from competitors in the direct selling industry. Everybody knows that the direct selling industry is a competitive industry, and it's crucial to set your company apart from others in the field. So let's start off with a question. Where do we start exactly? What are the first steps would you invite a corporate team to take as they prepare to create a framework to win in today's marketplace?
Great question. Thank you for that. Wow, that's what's on everyone's mind, isn't it? And what I would say is awareness that we are in a new day and in a new time. But if I could use a basketball analogy, and I hope this ages well, because we're in the NBA playoffs. But I've been following the Golden State Warriors, who were terrible on the road this year. They couldn't win road games, and yet they just won two big ones to advance in the playoffs. And Steve Kerr, the head coach of the Warriors, was asked about this in a press conference, and he said, "We are the Warriors right now. What happened in the regular season doesn't matter. It is a new season, it is a new time, and we are not held hostage by past performances or by things that have happened in the past. We are making the adjustments." And that's a team that knows how to do that. I would say to people in the direct selling space right now, listen to what Coach Kerr said. It really doesn't matter what happened in the regular season or last year or the year before. What matters is we are in a new day and time. And so you have to start there. We have to start with awareness of how the world changed during the pandemic. And I'm not talking about the virus itself. I'm talking about the impact on commerce, the impact on consumer buying preferences, and the way that direct sales has operated for decades with superior products, with well-trained sales forces, with bringing products that require a story to be told that cannot be told in a 30-second ad or even on something online to generate interest. We've got to look hard at that. Are we meeting the consumer where she is? She's on her device. She's moving. She's busy. And she doesn't have time to engage in some of the comfortable practices that direct sellers have grown accustomed to, with the way they reach out and, if I can use the word, distribute products.
Sure.
It's much more of a just in time. It's much more of a right now. It's far more digital. And when it comes to the opportunity, it's the same. If we talk about the analogy from basketball, how did we do it in 2015 and 16? How did we do it in 2010 and 11? Man, I was doing meetings all across the country with hundreds of people in the room, and I was talking about opportunity. And people were enrolling and lining up to join the business in the back of the room where we had the iPads lined up. It's different today. People are not as willing to attend such events, and fields are struggling with how to get that message out there. So what I would say is, where do you start? You start by recognizing and having awareness that some of these great things that we have all done, over the course of decades now are to the point where we need fresh eyes and we need some humility, some intellectual humility to be able to say maybe what worked in the past doesn't work today. And what has happened to the buying patterns of consumers, and what has happened to the gig economy, and who's winning in the gig economy that may be passing the direct selling channel up in terms of giggers, right? All the gigging opportunities that I see now they can almost all be done from home. They can almost all be done on the phone. And while we've been saying this all along, oh, you can do it from your phone. The fact of the matter is if you look under the hood and you actually pay attention beyond that nice saying, oh, it's all on your phone, and you really get into the machinations of what's the tech doing and what actions does the distributor or the consultant have to take vis-a-vis the consumer of where she is as a consumer of the product, and potentially a consumer of coming on board with the opportunity. It's just different. And we have to be more nimble. We have to go beyond headlines and buzzwords to actually delivering an end-to-end solution that will galvanize action in the modern day. And so if that's not where our heads are at, anything we come up with our heads in the wrong place is not going to lead a company to success in this day and time. And so awareness, a little bit of humility, and understanding that digital matters a lot, not just because it's a buzzword, but because consumers demand it.
Yeah.
And they're leading the companies in respect. So that'd be my first answer.
You know what I love about your challenge there, Clint, that I think I just want everyone to hear. DSEF gang, as you guys know, who are members of the group, this is a place where just executives are sharing what they're seeing across the space. It's a place we help each other out. Hear that awareness part of the kind of a behavioral customer avatar that's changed when you listen to what Clint's saying. I just hope you guys get that. And you even look at it in your own life. Like, what do you expect out of life if your own time? We have very different expectations as people than we did 2 years ago, than we did 4 years ago, than we had 6 years ago. And so there's some sacred cows that could be bottlenecking your growth right now. Really take a moment and say, okay, this is one of those exercises that after you've watched the stream, to go ahead and just, whether you're on the podcast or whether you're watching on video, put that down in your notes and find some space to pause and say, okay, where am I just missing it? Where can I get some fresh voices here to think about what sacred cows I'm holding on to that are just bottlenecking any possible future in our world? Hear that, gang. There's enough in what Clint just shared for you to set aside an hour of just, okay, 1 second, I got to start thinking about this. I'm sure we'll get to more today. Gail, walk us through our next step.
Thank you so much for your answers. It is so interesting. And I liked what you said about how we are not held hostages by our performances in the past. And you talked about how to start. Now, the next question is actually, what are the elements that are musts for creating a strategy in 2023? You did mention awareness and intellectual humility and considering the gig economy and digital matters. Is there anything that you would like to add as a must to creating a strategy in 2023?
Sure. We'll talk about the musts. When you say strategy, what a word. And one of the finest takes on strategy was from Jack Welch, who said, a strategy is a central idea. Now, we have a lot of tactics that come out of that, right? And sometimes we label them strategies, but really they're kind of tactics supporting a central idea or big statement of how you plan to win. And you've got to really think about that. What is the central idea? One must on the central idea, I believe, in direct selling right now is you have to be where the consumer is. And I'm talking about the end user. I'm not talking about the field at the moment, because the field cannot be successful without this. It isn't just lauding and heaping everything onto the sales force, which there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But I think that if you don't have them directed to the prize that matters, which is new customer acquisition, as a former CEO, I can tell you, new customer acquisition is the game. And the reason that direct sales forces are so important is because they are the volunteer army that gets new customers, that acquires new customers. And because that growth has slowed down across the channel as we've come out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, in the first part, it was high times for most people. Lots of reports of biggest month ever. Lots of people saying, wow, whispering almost, because we didn't want to say it out loud, that the onset of the pandemic really did help the channel as it relates to company growth. Why is that? Well, everybody was stuck at home and they were scrolling on social media because they weren't going to stores. Retail was all but shuttered. Going out to the grocery store was an adventure. Let's not forget, in the middle of 2020, like, am I going to get sick? I have to get eggs and milk for my family. And everybody started getting that stuff delivered or picking it up at the curb. That had an effect on the psyche of our country. And for a moment in time, and on the world at large, but for a moment in time, direct selling saw a windfall from that. Then as people started getting out of their homes, they wanted to get out and about, but they weren't doing quite as much aimless scrolling anymore. Their lives, they started traveling. Travel went way up again. And we all remember last summer, even getting on an airplane was more stressful than I ever remember it being, with system-wide failures and everything else. All of this had an effect. And so, as you say, the must on the central idea, I think it has to come back to the customer and how she wants to be approached. What's comfortable for her? That's a lodestar here. That is a North Star of any strategic consideration for how to win in this day and age. Which leads to the next question is, how do I equip my sales force with the right tools and the right methods and the right training to reach that consumer where she is in 2023 and beyond? Because I don't see the genie going back in the bottle. And so that begs the question on the technology landscape. And without getting into too much detail, I would just say elements such as CRM, elements on learning and development platforms that can deliver this in a way to the sales force that helps them be out in front and waiting and ready for where that consumer shows up. How does AI fit into all of this? I think that in the next few years, AI is going to become quite ubiquitous and quite democratized. And it's not going to be like it was for us in college, where we had to go to the library to look at encyclopedias and to go reading with our eyes, like old school, right? Like actually doing research and putting together essays. Right now, I could ask AI, please give me all the arguments, pro and con, for any societal issue. And you're going to get essays, pro and con, that are well written, that consider the big debates of the day. And so with the democratization of AI, how does a direct selling company put them in position to get their field the right words to say to the right woman or man at the right time, who is where she is or he is out there in the world? And I think because AI will be democratized to a lot of the things that are available digitally in the whole ecosystem of tech and on the online, what I think makes a big difference is once you're in the firewall of your company's data or your vendor's data, who might have access to other companies' trends, how is AI delivering with all of this the right message at the right time, the nudges, when to reach out, the words, what to say? Is it too much to ask AI to generate a script? Probably, but they can give us the clay to work with, right? To form that message. And the more data you have inside your own firewall, the more insight you have into consumer behavior, and not just in the world, but as it relates to your customers. And the more that can be served up in a way that is tailored, wow, what a difference. So the must is, where is the consumer? What does she want, really? How does she want to be notified and sold to?
Yeah.
And then using your tech system to enable your field with some of this stuff that's a little bit more just in time, and with the nudges to know when to follow up and how to do it. Those are some musts that I would say are there. Where's the consumer? Is it all about her? And how are you enabling your sales force to reach her?
What I love about what you just shared, Clint, and I think this is so important for everyone. One of the trends we wrote a large paper about beginning of the year for DSCF. We talked about viral trends in referral marketing for 2023. And the biggest piece of that was exactly what we're talking about is, in the past, I think we're all guilty of thinking that since we have experience in the direct selling space as executives, that we can just look at transactional data to run a company, things like enrollments, sales, and subscriptions, and just, yeah, we'll figure out our viral growth plan. We'll figure out our what to do and what to change. And because of companies who are using predictive systems and systems that are just in time, as you just shared, that suggest what to say next, I have seen a distinct change in the revenue per distributor able to be earned between the companies that are in the old space of, yeah, let's just look at enrollment, sales, and subscriptions to make decisions to run our company over here, to the ones that have done, as you've said, who have had taken action on what you're just saying and are literally using tools that create suggestions of what to do and when to do it, and are then tracking all that information, because it's like leading indicators and the things that are creating leading indicators all available to you as the executive. And you get to make better decisions because you're just more well informed when you've used platforms like that. That was a big paper we released in January of this year. And we continue to hear a lot of organizations say, okay, wait, we have to think about that more. And so it's right on exactly what we're seeing as well. So thank you for that. Back to you, Gail.
Exactly, and I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting with all the changes in the tech landscape, AI is really something that will come into play in the future as well. And with all this data that we have, the industry needs to know what to do exactly with that data and how to leverage that into their own companies as well. Now, the next question is, what pitfalls have you seen over the last year or the last couple of years that you'd encourage corporate teams to avoid? You did mention the pandemic and all the changes it has had over the years, but what specific pitfalls have you seen that you think everybody or companies need to avoid particularly?
Well, complacency is a big one. When sales were up 30-40% pretty much around the block, everybody I talked to, right, in 2020, and I would say the first 3 quarters maybe of 21, it was, well, yeah, we're up and we're forecasting the same next year. Boom, there goes the dynamite. That complacency right there, that almost everybody I know was frankly a little bit caught up in, if we're going to be honest here. Happy days were here again, and here we go, without looking around the corner, without thinking this moment won't last like this. It's not always going to be like this. What's around the corner? And I think that a lot of people fell into that trap, and good people who are very smart. It's not about being dumb. It's about in the moment when you're winning like that, the complacency sets in. The fact of the matter is everybody was woken up to harsh realities in the quarters that followed, that what was working yesterday isn't working today. And so just having that, the humility in a moment like that to say, a big pitfall is saying it's going to continue to be like this, or there's not something coming around the corner that's going to drastically reshape the landscape of how we do business. Everybody was caught with that. It's one thing to fall by 30 or 40% following the pandemic. It's something else to be forecasting 30% growth when you're falling 30%. It was a net of 60% of difference between what a lot of companies projected, told their boards, and or were planning internally, and what wound up being the case. So I think comfortable practices have to, big watch out. Traditions, comfortable practices. What is our DNA? Well, the DNA, if you want to talk about championship DNA, if you want to talk about the DNA of winning, it's not thinking back to when you were winning and thinking that's who you are today. It's when you were winning in the past, it's probably because you were pioneering something. It's probably because you had something during the heady times, during the winning seasons, that was much more about differentiation. You have to even do that from yourself, like a snake who sheds its skin. We have to all evolve and grow. And so I think one of the biggest pitfalls is to think that I have the knowledge base in my mind, or that my team, the people that I've surrounded myself with, that we have all the answers. It's a time that begs for intellectual curiosity. Stay curious. It's one of the biggest words I could say is curiosity, which gets you out of complacency. It gets you out of comfortable practices. It gets you out of the traditions and all the great memories you have of all the great things in the past that worked, and I'm just going to keep that going. Not the case. And so it's a little bit of a dose of, maybe it's a bitter pill to swallow, but leaders take bitter pills. Leaders stand up and raise their hands and say, we didn't get that right, did we?
Exactly.
And it's having the courage to admit that, and having the courage to challenge what are the comfortable practices that we have relied on that are no longer serving us. And I think some of this stuff is the way that people in the field on a peer-to-peer basis were contacting people. Are people responding to promotions the way that they used to? Is it really all about price? Is there something else going on, which is you make it convenient for me? Should some of those profits during the heady days have been redirected more to seeing around the corner and developing the type of technology and platforms and getting out in front of AI instead of being wagged by AI? I think that these are some pitfalls. It's hard because nobody knows when I call it the fog of war. When you're in the fog of war and you're taking incoming missiles, you're in survival mode. You're not really in growth mode of getting territory. You're in, okay, how many people are going to die today? And, how can we stop the bleeding? And when you're in the fog of war, elevating above the fog is very, very hard. So I'm not saying this to be judgmental or to be mean or anything other than to say I think it's human nature that when you're in that battle to do it. But you're asking me the pitfalls. The pitfalls is to live in that fog too much. It's to not pull yourself out of it and look around the corner and to see the burgeoning technology that's happening all around you. And we've talked a lot about AI already, but
Sure.
with all of this happening, what are we doing about it? And how are we setting ourselves up with a 3 to 5 year plan? Going back to the last question about musts, what is it long-term and how are we going to be able to foresee and stay nimble enough? How is our platform nimble enough to be able to evolve? How is our thinking nimble enough to not be lulled away into some sort of security that's false about our own futures? So challenging those practices, thinking about the overall landscape, and having the courage to not forecast high, even though that's what everybody wants to see who owns a company. And the last thing I would add to it is in the similar vein is if you're constantly doing SWOT analyses, if you're always thinking about the risks and the threats and the weaknesses, it's not fun stuff to think about, but it's what champions do because, as I always say, success gives us confidence. Failure gives us growth. When people are in success mode, they're not usually in learning mode. They're in enjoyment of the success mode, which, by the way, feels really good. And we all want that. And it makes us feel very confident and righteous in our positioning. However, if you want to grow and you want to keep learning, the curiosity that I mentioned is what can keep that fresh and can keep us from falling into some of those traps.
And what I love about what you just shared, there's like certain elements when you're in this complacency bubble that you don't even know, where there's certain times when outside information can help and can make a difference. We talked a little bit about AI here, but the bigger one I see all the time with a changing world as fast as it is here is even understanding our own numbers in our world. Like many times, to your point, where the way we're able to stay complacent is we're living with these like old long cycle feedback loops of, okay, we're going to do this campaign and in 90 days we'll look at how we feel we did and we'll make our assumptions. And part of what you spoke about just a moment ago that I want to make sure people hear is that your competitors aren't always living in that same world as you. So you may still be in the 90-day cycle world of, let's do initiatives, let's track for 90 days, we'll change what we teach at Super Saturday and we'll see what happens. And guess what? Some of your competitors are using technology, to Clint's point, to where they're getting data daily on everyone's behavior in the world and knows what's working and what's not working. And some of them are tweaking content and messaging and positioning literally behind the scenes through a lot of these suggestive tools that Clint had spoken to, where they're changing stuff every 2 weeks. And so you look, if you're rolling out 4 campaigns a year, 90 days at a time, and your competitors have tighter feedback loops than you, and even if they were just monthly, they're doing 12 a year when you're doing 4 a year. They're going to be 300% more adjusted to the market's needs than you are. If you're in one of the competitive fields where there's somebody running at a 2-week cycle, you got to think about that. They're adjusting 24 times a year when you're adjusting 4 times a year. They're adjusting 600% more than you are to their own data in their own feedback loop.
What a great point. What a great point. There's so much that we have. All of us have this in house. It's just a matter of our ability to classify the data, to sort it properly, and to pay attention. But great point. It isn't just about getting it from the outside. There's a lot of data internally. Are we looking at it the right way? Are we looking beyond productivity, activity, and new recruits? Or are we really getting into the behavioral dynamics at play? Great point.
And to that, Clint, like it's not always that you need outside people to bring you data. Sometimes it's outside people need to help you ask better questions of your own data. See, we've turned data into God. We really have in our business God, right? In our world, we've all turned it into like, ooh, the God of data will save us. Like we're all worshiping this thing. And what I've been telling people is like, hey guys, actually the data is meaningless. What you do with the data is meaningful. And I say that in so many board meetings, and it's like like what are we gonna take action on out of the data is what's meaningful here. It's not just, oh yeah, we got our data. It's what are we gonna do with it? Are we asking the right questions of this? And that's what I continue to run into. Man, I love it so far. Good stuff. Gail, what do we got next?
Our next question is actually, if there was only one new practice a team had the bandwidth to deploy, what would you suggest that they deploy? You did talk about staying curious. And is there any specific practice that you think people need to deploy within their company?
Great question. You're trying to get me to get really specific into the point with all this going on. And I think as we talk about the consumer and the consumer preferences being number one, if I had bandwidth for only one thing, I would be thinking about how do I enable my sales force to be able to be at the right place at the right time with the right message. Once you kind of are following where the consumer is, where she hangs out, what her preferences are, where is she getting her information, what in the zero moment of truth when she has to make a decision online to purchase something, what's going on inside her mind psychologically to make her purchase. If you're solid on that, then what I would put my emphasis on in terms of bandwidth restrictions would be how am I enabling my sales force to take advantage of that? This whole thing comes down to behavioral dynamics and motivational psychology. That's the game. How do I keep a sales force motivated? How do I keep their psychology positive? I have to enable them to win. Knowing that the consumer preferences have shifted mightily, they're not going to come by your house to pick up a sample. They're not going to go to your meeting many times. So how do I enable her as a member of my sales force to be able to be where her consumer is and to have the right message at the right time? I call that enablement of the sales force. And it is 100% rooted in motivational psychology and human behavioral dynamics, the powers of persuasion, for the principles of reciprocity. You know, people who give something away. If I were to give Ben Dixon something, a little charm or a little gift, he was going to remember that because he probably wouldn't expect it from me. And I'm not telling you to expect it. But then I would almost feel, Ben would almost feel like I've got to do something for Clint. And I think that is rooted in the way that human beings socially engage with one another. 100% is.
Sure.
You know, I was just looking at, you know, I did a board meeting at Ruby Ribbon at Lake Tahoe where we went skiing and we had our board. One of the members of my team, Leah Catavona, who is Chief Growth Officer, gave me this little charm, which I don't know if the camera can pick it up.
There you go.
But resort at Squaw Peak, which now has a new name called Palisades. But here it is, and I'm talking about her. Why? Because she gave me a charm, and now I'm calling out her name. These principles of reciprocity, these principles of motivational psychology are where I would be focusing the smartest people in my company. And I would be focusing on how do we enable that? And that gets to technology and it gets to platforms. It brings AI back into the conversation, and it also brings data in the way, other than just worshiping at the altar of the data god. I think it's what are we really learning here? What are the takeaways? I like to develop what are called behavioral hierarchies. What are the most important behaviors I need out of my sales force? Know them, debate this, have the internal arguments about what's the most important. Is it recruiting? Is it simply new customer acquisition? And make a hierarchy of what behavior is the most important. And then you've got to develop your sales enablement platform to be able to speak to those priorities of behavior in the pantheon of all behaviors of humans. And I'm fascinated with human behavior. Why do we do the things we do? How did dictators get born and thrive in the world? Why do people do dastardly deeds? Why do people show love and compassion? What's going on in the behavioral psychology of people? I think if we can get real about that as being a core way of differentiation for a direct selling company today, to be masters at this, but to be masters of understanding human behavior and what motivates them and things like reciprocity, and how do you persuade with confidence with good success, the decisions that companies make about what technology platform am I using, what kind of app, how am I nudging them, what do the alerts look like, how is AI involved in this? And how are they going to show up at the right moment to the consumer at the zero moment, or actually prepare the consumer so at the zero moment of truth, she makes a decision to purchase from your sales force? That is the one practice, or the one thing, if I had to narrow it down, would be enabling that sales force with the right motivational cues and rewards, building that community to be able to meet the consumer where she is. And the companies that do this the best will win. Now, and in the coming years.
What I love about what you shared there, Clint, with the law of reciprocity, gang, we also often share book titles that you can check out as an executive from these podcasts and video streams. The book that totally came to mind as Clint was just sharing, gang, if you haven't read Robert Cialdini's classic book, Influence, it was redone just recently. And so Influence New and Expanded is on Audible and is available. And he will unpack the social proof of gifts and reciprocity and the power of everything Clint was just saying of the social psychology element. We've had a panel podcast with 3 executives who've done some of the most charitable programs of doing good in running a referral marketing company and how doing good fits in with your story on a previous episode. So if you would like to check out Cindy Monroe from 31 Gifts and Sam Castor, today runs Alavea, used to run Manatech, talk about doing good and how that's changed. And they had Peter Hirsch is on that panel as well. It's a fantastic series in our previous episodes that all fits into some of that ways people reach out today that's so relevant that grabs someone's heart and makes them want to respond psychologically
100%.
to that. Well, you're doing good at the same time.
Well, I want to shout out
Awesome
Lori
stuff.
Bush right now,
Yeah.
Lori Bush on the board of Ruby Ribbon. She was my boss when I was CEO. And she
Yeah.
was also my boss as the CEO of Rodan Fields. And for a number of years, and I followed that woman for quite some time. And she's had an enormous imprint on my professional life. And Lori was the one who was pounding this reciprocity from the book Influence. Thank you for calling that out into my life when we were at Ruby Ribbon. And one thing that Lori kept, she was not going to shut up about this until I did it, but it was basically, why aren't you giving out tape measures so women can measure themselves, because they're going to remember who gave me this tape measure with the Ruby Ribbon branding on it. And what are they going to do about it? When we finally launched that, much to Lori's happiness after kind of trying to get at me at this for some time, is we had a big event where everybody had to have their tape measures in hand. And you know what happens when you give a woman a tape measure? It goes in her bag and she's going to find it again. And that tape measure is going to come out and she's going to remember, okay, I've got to measure all these parts of my body so I can get the right fit. So simple, maddeningly simple. But at the end of the day, Lori was right, as she usually is, about this topic. And we had a tremendous turnout and result from that. Why? Because we were talking about motivational psychology, because we were talking about reciprocity and influence. And you influence people by giving them the tape measure, the keychain, the charm, the thing. Because they had to take an action with it. It wasn't just like, take this product and swallow it and let me know if you feel anything a day. It was more about, use this thing to get yourself, so that now they're actually physically using this touchstone that they've been given by somebody, feeling like they kind of owe it to the person that gave it to them to do what they said they were going to do. After all, I took her tape measure, which is probably a couple of bucks. So I want to do something about that and get the tape measure back if you live locally. If not, you cough it up for getting the lead. But ultimately, this is an example of that. It's simple things, and I'll just add this word simplicity here. We're having some heady conversations about psychology, but we have to be able to distill this down to behaviors that are simple. What do I do now? And what is that thing right now? That's not going to be 80,000 competing thoughts, but it's going to be the thing, the action I'm going to take. When it's rooted in such a topic as reciprocity, you do get a bigger result from it. So that's where my focus would be to answer the question on if I had limited bandwidth, I would be all about this topic, making sure it cascades through technology decisions, sales programs, recognition. Are we recognizing the behavior? You know, there's behavior and there's outcomes. And when we say new customer acquisition, that's actually an outcome. And so is recruitment, by the way, and so is retention. These are outcome metrics. But what are the behaviors? Reach out is a behavior. Inviting with reciprocity is a behavior. Following up is a behavior. And the more that companies can romance the behavioral side of this business, rather than simply recognizing and lauding those with the best outcomes, one precedes the other. You reward yourself for training for the race. I know we want to win the race. I know you want to get in shape. So instead of, I'll reward myself in 6 months when I have washboard abs, it's like, no, how about I reward myself like I did last weekend for going to a boot camp class where everybody kicked my tail. The women in the class were, kicking my rear end in terms of how well they were performing, but I still did it. And my abs were still sore. My abs were therefore getting stronger. So what am I going to do in that moment to reward myself for the behavior I did to get the outcome I want, which is to sit on the beach and be proud of myself without a shirt, right? So that's the outcome. but the behavior needs to be romanced. And in our direct selling organizations, this very same thing applies.
What I love about that, Clint, is we've seen that just in these last, it's actually only been the last 18 months, but coming out of COVID, we've seen organizations literally dashboarding what you just talked about, like literally dashboarding who on the team's making the most calls today, who on the team's following up, who's listening to the most training, who's sharing on social media. We're seeing that. We're seeing people gamify that around daily habits, concepts like winning the day. I've seen that make a real difference. We've seen apps outside of network marketing direct sales like Noom or MyFitnessPal help people get the washboard abs or lose weight or get the body they want by having people celebrate the habits that win a day, like drinking water or measuring your calories or making sure that you worked out. And we've actually seen that and some of our reports be the difference maker here inside of referral marketing as well.
It's like when your kids get good grades in school, I do this. I take them out to dinner. I try to heap praise on them for their outcome. But I ask myself as a parent, am I doing a good enough job with their behavior? Like, am I rewarding them? Am I congratulating them and encouraging them when they're doing the hard thing, which is studying when they'd rather watch YouTube or go out with their friends, right? That's the discipline and that's the muscle, and not just relying on AI to do my homework for me. It's what are we doing behaviorally to win the day? And then, of course, you celebrate the good grades. But the good grades come from some behavioral discipline. And I think we've lost track of that a little bit in how we parent. But it's the very same principle that applies to a large sales force is if you want the result, and everybody does, everybody wants the outcome, and we all get the blah, blah, blah. But we're not, but the companies that are doing these daily dashboards or these behavioral dashboards, I think they're on the right track, Ben.
Clint, I had so much fun today. This has just been awesome. As we wrap up, Gail and I have a favorite question we like to ask it, but it's just a quick one. It's a little 1-minuter, and we rarely actually tell hosts that we're going to ask it ahead of time, but we did. For fairness to all of our other hosts, people who have come on our panel, we did give Clint a 10-year question ahead of time. But this is our famous one that we end literally every session on. Usually we surprise folks, but we love Clint enough that we gave him a chance to think about it. So go ahead, Gail, our final question today.
If you could go back in time for 10 years, knowing all that you know now, what would you tell yourself?
Keep going. Don't give up. Stay curious. In my own career and all of our careers, if you think back to what you were all doing 10 years ago, 5 years ago, many people right now, if they could tell their 10-year-old self, this is where you're going to be, they might not believe it. I never would have believed I would have been the CEO of a women's underwear company. If you would have told me that when I was a teenager, I would have laughed and blushed. How could such a thing be? I think that we have to keep going, keep breathing. Do not give in to despair and sadness. And I'm going to get a little more on a serious note. Don't let the depression demons beat you. Keep believing in yourself. Surround yourself with good literature. And ultimately, curiosity for me has been the key that has unlocked opportunity. I would tell myself that. And I'm telling myself that now, by the way, because just because you get to different levels in life, it doesn't mean that the internal negative voice in your head doesn't exist. It still exists. And sometimes it gets louder. And that's kind of part of the internal battle that we face as human beings. But it would be keep going, keep breathing. You've got to get through the day. And for those who have experienced ups and downs in life, I stand with you. I empathize because I know what that feels like. And if we could only see the future that we could create for ourselves, how much less anxiety would we go through in the meantime, which ages us, by the way. It ages us. It affects our body and our spirits in some negative ways. And so when you look back and you look back at the things that have happened, you say, why didn't I enjoy that more? Why was I nervous the whole time? Why wasn't I in the moment with joy? It's like to use another basketball analogy, and I'll bring back the Warriors just because they had a big game last night. But when you watch Stephen Curry play, he's smiling. He is under the most intense pressure of anybody. And everybody's saying his dynasty's done. And he goes out there and had 50 points in a game 7 to lead his team. He was smiling. He was enjoying himself playing basketball in the toughest, most pressure-packed of circumstances. And I've seen him do that for almost 10 years. And I use that example of Stephen Curry to say, am I smiling right now as I do a hard thing?
Yeah.
Am I continuing to breathe? Am I continuing to execute? Because I think one of the regrets of the dying, if you look at what people regret when they know their time is up on this planet, many of them say, I wish I would have let myself be happier. I wish I would have enjoyed the journey more and been less anxious about what happens next. There is so much wisdom in that. What I would have told my 40-year-old self 10 years ago would have been, buckle up, keep breathing, keep going, stay intellectually curious. Your learning is not done when you leave school. In fact, it's barely begun. Now you're in adulthood. Now you have to adult from here to death. And so while we're an adult, how do we keep joy when the feelings of cynicism come in, when the voices of self-doubt come in? And I think if we remain curious and say, I wonder why, even at the psychology level, I wonder why I'm anxious.
Mm-hmm.
That's fear. That's anxiety. Let's talk about that. When you name it, it becomes less personal. You don't embody anger. If you say, I feel anger, okay, fine. Anger is at the backseat of my car. I can just have a conversation with the anger. Now I've depersonalized it. But when you say I'm angry, it's like, what I'm an emotion now? Like, what is that? Like, it's taking control of my being. I think that there's an ability to engage with oneself with better compassion. And when we stay curious about things, good things and bad things, I wonder why a dictator became so evil. Well, be curious about that. Learn about that. I wonder why this person succeeded and this person didn't. Get curious about be an investigative journalist in your own heart about why these things happen. And that curiosity keeps ego out of the C-suite. That curiosity keeps companies moored in something akin to a corporate humility, to where, they'll take their victory laps and they'll celebrate. But along the way, they aren't caught up in the hubris of some good quarters or some good years, but they remain exceptionally curious about human behavior, about trends in the economy, and about the way to win. So talking to 40-year-old Clint, it's keep breathing, keep going, stay curious. I think that's what I would tell anybody in this situation. And that applies to now. It doesn't just apply to what you tell your old self. It applies to what I tell my 50-year-old self today, with the children that I have, with the career juncture I'm at. What are you going to learn today? And if you love learning, you will handle failure 10 times better, because all failure is a gift-wrapped opportunity for you to learn and be wise, which is going to make future success more probable. And it's also going to make you a better, successful person when it comes again for you, because you will be in a position of curiosity and humility, rather than in a position where learning is like, I know. I mean, I had a meeting with someone the other day who said, I've seen everything in business. I'm like, oh my gosh, what a thing for him to say. I haven't learned half of what I want to learn. And being able to admit that and staying humble about that is what is going to draw people to you. People don't like a haughty leader. People don't like a leader. Leaders are ineffective when they show up as the masterclass giver and the person who has all the answers. It's the person who shows up and said, I know some things, but there's a lot I don't know. And I'm aware that I don't know a lot. Then the antenna are always up. That person's going to continue to get more wise, because they are open to learning, and they view failure as an opportunity to improve. Some people don't even like the word failure. Oh, fine, I'll accept it. Failure happens. I mean, I don't think we have to be Pollyannish about the fact that sometimes things don't work out. But it's the mental fortitude in that moment to be able to say, what an opportunity for me right now, instead of I suck, I have to isolate myself, I'm embarrassed, I'm right. And this is part of being an adult, because you could apply this to any aspect of human existence. But as we're talking in this podcast about our wonderful world of direct selling and how we all engage and what's happening now and what's going to happen to AI and what about influencers and what about affiliate models and what about comp plans, all these questions going on in the background, it's, am I curious or am I a know-it-all?
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you're an executive in the direct selling world, I would ask you to ask yourself that question. Am I curious or am I a know-it-all? And to be honest honesty serves us in these questions, and I think that sets us up. So that's my answer for the lecture I would give my 10-year-old self 10 years ago.
Awesome, Clint. Man, Clint and Gail, I had a ton of fun today. This was too good. And again, if you're watching on one of the streaming services and you haven't yet plugged into the DSEF, DSEF is free. It's the only community for direct selling executives. If you haven't yet found us on LinkedIn or Facebook, it's the Direct Selling Executives Forum. Do request to join and apply. It's totally free. And you may get asked, just like Clint, to speak on a future panel, or you get to attend and listen to others. So all sorts of good things. And man, what a powerful, reflective moment, Clint. Thank you for bringing that to each of us today. I think that each of us needs some one-on-one time with ourselves after listening to this podcast today.
I also want to shout out. I want to shout out my mentor Mauro Schneidman, who was my CEO at Jafra Cosmetics. He's been my Yoda. He's been on my shoulder. He's been whispering a lot of this into my ear for years. And get a good mentor is another thing I would say, because it's so important. And Mauro is a master of human psychology, and I have because he's curious, by the way, not because he's a know-it-all, but I have learned so much from him. And go be that mentor to someone else and pay it forward.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for hosting the session. We appreciate you. For updates on future sessions, feel free to subscribe to the video podcast on whichever platform you're on, whether you're watching us today on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor FM, Apple Music, or you're in the LinkedIn group. Thank you so much for attending today. We'll talk with you all soon. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.